welcome to the channel. If you're a long-time supporter of the channel, you've heard me speak often of the importance of exclusives to platforms. Not just gaming platforms, but any content-driven business. As with many things, this was an accepted fact in the gaming community as a whole, until a certain gaming platform seemingly overnight changed its strategy. I think this is for a couple of reasons. The inherent tribalism that wants fans to conform to a narrative, something that's been an issue for me personally, as I simply refuse to accept and go along with things I don't believe to be true. But there's another reason, which I'm hoping to resolve today. That reason is I just don't think anyone's made a strong enough case for exclusives, not in the gaming community, and especially not in the boardrooms of Microsoft and Xbox. Today, I'm going to make that case, because as I've said many times, it is a demonstrable fact. But before I do, understand that this is not an attack on the Xbox brand. I believe in the new strategy, for the most part. And the talk of Xbox dying is just low IQ analysis of the strategy. If you like the content, please hit that like button, consider subscribing. Let's get into it.
We're on a mission from God.
To begin understanding why exclusivity drives a platform, we need to take a look back in time at the gaming industry. Exclusive content has been a part of the landscape of gaming since the Magnavox Odyssey hit markets back in 1972, and it was quickly followed by the Atari and the ColecoVision. The reason for exclusive content at that time was more of a necessity, as there was no software or hardware that was really compatible. Each console had unique processors, memory configurations, and graphics capabilities, and they used cartridges of varying sizes, making it very difficult to run games designed for one system on another. This created a landscape of innovation, as each system offered a diversity of games, and it was on the strength of those games that the business would rise or fall. Game makers realized this very early on, and exclusives would rule the day. There were later some adapters for the ColecoVision that would allow people to play those Atari 2600 games, but Atari had forged ahead of the market at that time with innovative games like Pong and Space Invaders. The Atari 2600 had a wide variety of games, and the strength of its exclusive content forced its competitor to offer its consumers a way to play those games on their own console. Atari had also established its brand with memorable ads, celebrity endorsements, and had made the Atari available in more countries globally than any of its competitors, but without content like Asteroids, Missile Command, and Defender, the brand would not have become the late 70s, early 80s cultural icon that it did. Even to this day, Atari is still a recognized name. Such was the strength of the brand. However, these early systems would fall victim to a video game crash in the 80s, and a new icon would emerge in Atari's place. The Nintendo hit the scene in 1983 and filled a gap in the market, bringing innovative 8-bit graphics and smooth gameplay. They solidified their dominance with Mario Brothers, Donkey Kong, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, and products like the Zapper, an infrared gun that could accurately target on-screen sprites that spawned games like Duck Hunt, Shooting Range, and Operation Wolf. The Nintendo was the go-to console with a huge global reach both in Eastern and Western markets, and a massive library of games that you could only play on the original Nintendo Entertainment System. But it would not be long before another competitor came into the market to challenge this new leader. Sega, unless you're American and you say Sega, entered the market in 1988, targeting an older audience that had grown up on the Atari and the Nintendo and were in their mid-teens. The 16-bit console war had begun. Nintendo had built up a huge consumer base, and Sega would have to pull out all the stops to even have a chance of competing against the video game icon in Nintendo. They had a 2-year head start into the 16-bit generation, and they used that to full effect early on. Sega had innovative hardware focusing on blast processing, which was more a marketing term than it ever was a technical spec. They ran ad campaigns making direct comparisons between the NES's 8-bit graphics and the Sega Genesis' superior 16-bit graphics. Sega ensured that they had full third-party support prior to launch and exclusive content, rallying industry publishers like Acclaim, Accolade, Capcom, Electronic Arts, Konami, and Namco, just to name a few. The Sega Genesis boasted games like NBA Action 95, Rolling Thunder, and the full-blood edition of Mortal Kombat that was a one-to-one with the arcade if you entered in the code, and many more other console exclusives that I'm sure grizzled veterans will remember. Nintendo, on the other hand, fought back with titles like Super Mario Kart, Star Fox, Super Mario All-Stars, Pilot Wings, and Super Mario World 2. The competition was fierce and fought with hard-hitting ad campaigns that focused on brand identity, spawning the famous Sega ad, Sega does what Nintendo don't. And of course, through all this, we got amazing games. When the Super NES launched, they met the challenger with games like Super Mario Bros. And continued throughout the generation to bring innovation with Final Fantasy III, Super Mario World, Chrono Trigger, The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, and many other titles that you probably still remember the names of today and are still being developed today in their new iterations. And all the while, we the gamers benefited. The harder they fought, the better the games got, and the more games that we got. The battle for supremacy carried on for a further 2 generations, and Sega would go on to make many missteps that would eventually be their demise. They released the Sega CD and the 32X as add-ons within a 2-year span of each other. Both provided upgraded processing power for the Genesis, which was confusing as to which the consumer should buy, but then they did not support either of those games, with must-play games making them almost redundant additions. The Saturn was then released almost on top of the 32X, giving consumers even more reasons to be confused.
Sega Saturn, the most powerful, the most technologically advanced game system anywhere.
Yeah.
Sega Saturn is the newest and most indulgent taste temptation from Sega, delivering crystal clear digital video and rich, creamy 3D graphics. And each unit is topped off with a delicious DSP chip dedicated to scrumptious CD quality sound.
And on top of all that, each different SKU was expensive to develop and manufacture, meaning that Sega had set itself up to fail. To add to the faltering system's problems, they made critical errors in marketing. One of the worst was shadow dropping the Sega Saturn at E3. Whilst this was seen from the hardcore fans as a great thing, Sega had failed to build hype for the new machine prior to its launch, which put them on the back foot, and it was a position from which the Saturn never recovered. They also made catastrophic errors in the development of their new machine. And aside from being extremely expensive to produce, it was also hard to develop for, resulting in much fewer third-party developers producing games for the console. And when games were developed, they were often not at the quality that Sega had promised to deliver from the new system. Now, throughout all this, Nintendo continued putting out quality games, producing banger after banger after banger, back to back to back. Sega would go on to release the Dreamcast, righting many of the wrongs that they'd made with the Saturn, but a new player had already entered the market from Sony, and Sega would never recover from the mistakes that they'd made with the Saturn, and they exited the console market forever in 2001. I don't want to detail the entire history of the video games industry, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, but are you starting to see a pattern yet? Sega dropped its output of first-party games for many reasons, and they stunted its third-party access. There wasn't just one reason that collapsed Sega's console business, but one thing is very clear. Sega lost focus on what it was doing well. That one thing that we all turn up for in gaming, games. Skipping forward to the 8th generation of consoles, and a new console war had begun to heat up. Xbox had released its first console in 2001, coming in more expensive than its competitors, but it offered online play with Xbox Live. And they built on successes such as Halo Combat Evolved, an exclusive that utilized its more powerful hardware, delivering next-gen graphics that wowed the fans. Xbox had a slew of other exclusive titles and had mostly focused on the Western market with titles like Fable. But by the time the 360 had released in 2005, Microsoft had built a solid fan base and were looking to build off its early successes against the Sony's PlayStation 2. Sony, however, had not seen the new entrant as a threat to its business. Both consoles would announce at E3, and Xbox had learnt from its previous gen and hit the ground running, offering its console a full $100 cheaper US than the PS3. Sony had made the mistake of overestimating its dominance in the market. The Xbox had built its original console with a focus on being easy to develop for, and they continued that with their next SKU, the Xbox 360. Whilst the PS3 had developed what on paper looked to be a more powerful console, was extremely difficult to develop for, making the power differential almost redundant. Xbox ensured its customers had a huge range of exclusives, with Cameo, the Gears of War trilogy, Halo 2 and 3, Alan Wake, Dead Rising, Forza Motorsport, Fable 2 and 3, and many others. Launching a full year prior to the PS3, Xbox had sold an estimated 7.3 million before Sony had even sold a single console. The PS3's launch exclusives were sparse, and the drought would continue for a few years to come, with must-play games being few and far between. However, PlayStation had realized their mistake at the beginning of the generation, and they were busy cooking. Now, of course, at this point, we could discuss the dreaded red ring, but again, whilst you could be mistaken for believing it is, this is not a generational history video. This is all heading somewhere. Keep that in mind, but it's fair to say that the Xbox 360 dominated that generation. PlayStation would recover, but very late in the generation, and also because they continued to sell that generation long after Xbox had cancelled the 360 manufacturing. Now, Xbox guys, stay with me here. I'm a fan. I'm not a shill, and things are about to get a little rough. Now, fast forwarding to the end of the generation, and Sony had righted the wrongs, reducing its pricing, and by the end of 2014, they'd released undeniable hits like Uncharted Drake's Fortune, Uncharted 2 Among Thieves, Gran Turismo 5, Gran Turismo 6, Resistance: The Fall of Man 1 and 2, Resistance 3, Killzone 2, Ni no Kuni, and the smash hit The Last of Us, which was so good that it's been re-released 53 times. Ah, Sony. By the end of the 8th generation, Sony had firmly understood what gamers wanted: fucking great games. Something that Xbox had seemingly lost sight of. And at the launch of Xbox One, they firmly announced to the world with TV.
Xbox One. TV experience. TV and movies. TV. Xbox. Watch TV. TV.
Television. Television. TV. Television.
Television, 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 TV, TV, TV.
Television, television. I'm thrilled to announce a live-action Halo television series.
Television, TV.
Television. TV. 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 TV.
They also had a slew of other anti-consumer choices that they built into the Xbox One, such as DRM. I won't go into those now, but there was plenty of missteps they made with that launch. I think we all know them. Xbox had made the mistake of overestimating their market dominance. Now, the Xbox One is remembered as the console that had no games, and that is not quite true. The Xbox One launched in 2013 with Rise, Son of Rome, Dead Rising, Killer Instinct, and Crimson Dragon. All, I would argue, are pretty good games, especially Rise. Dude, that game was so fucking brutal, and the combat was crazy fun. Jamming your sword so deep into the shoulder of an enemy you'd hit his hip was so satisfying. I genuinely felt like Russell Crowe in Gladiator. Fuck, that game was great. Sorry about that, I got a bit off track, but it was amazing. Xbox has got an easy win if they ever do a remake of that one. Anyway, whilst the team at Xbox would go on to release around 4 exclusives a year, many of them failed to meet expectations. Now, I'm not saying that they had nothing here, guys, but they just didn't raise the bar. Not only did the exclusives fail to meet expectations, but Xbox would step on rake after rake after rake after... Honestly, if there was a rake in the middle of the Arizona desert, an Xbox employee would find it and step on it. True story, man. With the always online DRM issues, the underpowered hardware, Kinect bundling that made the system more expensive than its competitors, shutting down Lionhead Studios, the makers of Fable. Like, seriously, imagine telling an employee that paints masterpieces to go sculpt a masterpiece and then firing them when it's shit. They paint masterpiece. They're not sculptors. Anyway, look, it's not a great analogy, but you get what I'm trying to say. They forced that studio into closure by telling them what to make. Anyway, you get the point. Xbox made a lot of mistakes during the Xbox One era, but they could have gotten away with all of it had they just done one single thing multiple times. Make great games. Now, games, they're subjective. And I know there will be many, even some I call friends, that will argue that Xbox did that. And I'm sorry to tell you, through that generation, no, they did not. They made good games. They could have even made just good games if they'd made enough and were consistent, but that's just not the case. Don't get me wrong. I love Halo. I fucking love Gears, but I can't think of a single exclusive that I could say I fucking love during that Xbox One gen. Okay, that's a lie. I loved Ori, and fuck Jeff Keighley for robbing that game at the Game Awards. Now, at the same time as Xbox was doing what it was doing, PlayStation ended the PS3 gen strong and entered the PS4 gen well, actually, they entered the PS4 gen pretty weakly. Look, I'm sorry, PlayStation guys, but the PS4 wasn't exactly hitting home runs until about 2015. And even then, it was From Software with Bloodborne that carried them through to 2016. But Sony, with the lessons of the PS3 era fresh in their minds, had not forgotten. And from 2016 onwards, they started dropping hit after undeniable hit. PlayStation 4 completely dominated the generation on the strength of their exclusives. Let's be clear at this point about something. The Xbox had way more features than the PS4. The UI was better. There were more options for customization. The party system was better and still is. The snap feature was awesome. Where the hell did that go? I loved that feature. There were voice command features with Kinect, crossplay, back compat, and I could go on. The Xbox One was feature rich and the PS4 was feature poor. That's just a fact. Now, I just want to make this as clear as possible for people who think that features have or will carry a console. I'm sorry, it's just demonstrably wrong. The Xbox has always had a better feature set than the PS, and the PS has always been behind in that regard. I mean, come on. Have you heard PS guys in COD lobbies? I'm not even going to talk about the Switch's UI and features. You have a number instead of a gamer tag. A number. Gamer tags have been around for decades, Nintendo. Get your shit together. Anyway, the point I'm making here is, I hope, very clear. Games are what we gamers show up for. It's what we purchase a console for, and without them, the console is useless. The more games, the better quality games, the better every console is done, which brings us to third parties. There's been a bit of a theme also running through this thread that I'm talking about here, and it certainly has a huge effect on success. Earlier, I mentioned that when Sega came into the picture back in the 1980s, they made sure they had full third-party support. In fact, they made sure they had third-party exclusives and special features for games that only Sega had, like the gore from Mortal Kombat. First-party exclusives are an easier sell if they're supported by third-party games that your competitor has, and even better if you have third-party exclusives that your competitor does not have. Having third-party support means you always have a library of games to play, and it's often third-party that has driven the industry forward in AAA and even in smaller indie experiences. Platform holders that work with their partners to bring every game possible to a platform to ensure their players aren't left out help to solidify that fan base. But third-party is not the largest predictor of success for a platform. We only need to look at Nintendo to understand that the strength of your first-party offering can supersede third-party. Nintendo has spent years ensuring that their first-party studios are producing regular first-party content at a high-quality bar. Many will say Nintendo is the exception to the rule. It is not the exception. It is the rule. PlayStation has done the same. Both platform holders have made mistakes in various generations, but they've ensured that their first-party offerings came often and met the expectations and in many cases exceeded them. This created a strong brand for both Nintendo and PlayStation. Now, when you think Nintendo, you automatically think Mario. Straight away it comes to mind, and we know there will be more Mario games to come. Buying into Nintendo guarantees this. Nintendo has been careful with every first-party release to ensure that when you buy a first-party game, you know what you're getting, a quality game. Sure, there's been a couple of middling Nintendo games, but they've been consistent enough to shore up consumer trust. When you think PlayStation, you think God of War, and we know there'll be another God of War. There's no denying that PlayStation's brand isn't just tied to one mascot, but to a strong legacy of great first-party exclusives. It is a brand that they've done a bit of damage to of late, but it's still strong on the back of the last generation's consistent quality releases. Now, Xbox fans, before you start flipping out, I am one of you. Stay with me to the end here. Xbox, since the Xbox One, has failed to foster and cultivate that brand. We should expect a quality Halo release every generation, a quality Gears release every generation, a quality Forza release twice a generation. Now Xbox has smashed it out of the park with Forza 5. I don't even like racing games, and that game I played the shit out of. Forza 5 is the example of what first party should be doing with every new release. But let's be honest. Halo has been let down after letdown. Halo 4 was a great campaign, but failed in its multiplayer. How does the preeminent console shooter fuck up multiplayer? Halo 5 was okay, but it wasn't really Halo. I could do a whole video on that, but we'll move on. Halo Infinite, though, whilst an awesome shooter, was launched missing features, lacking content. And I mean, fuck, all they had to do to cover their ass at launch was launch Forge. That would have literally solved the problem. They must have known what was coming. They must have known they were light on content. The Gears franchise, whilst 4 and 5 are fantastic games, they went away from the Phoenix family. They went away from Marcus. Now, whether you agree or not, to me and many, Marcus Phoenix is Gears, and it just took something out of the brand. Not to mention making his son a total dick. I mean, come on, man, the apple can't fall that far from the tree. Look, all of this creates mistrust in a gaming community, and with every misstep, it damages the brand. They've switched business strategies many times before even announcing the Fated 4 games. The Xbox brand has already taken a beating before they decided to send their games to other competitors. Xbox has an amazing lineup with so many first-party titles coming they cannot miss. Their last showcase was an undeniable return to form. But think about this. The ColecoVision launched an adapter to play Atari 26 games, but the Atari destroyed them. Why was that? Because why would you pay extra for an adapter to play Atari 2600 games when you can just buy an Atari 2600 instead? The Atari had the great games. Now listen, we know we're getting another Gears game. That game looks absolutely insane. I would literally crawl naked, balls out over broken glass to play that game early. That trailer looked fucking amazing. But what's the question that got asked immediately after the show? Will I be able to play that on PlayStation? That's the question. It's one every Xbox fan has in the back of their mind, and every time there's an announcement. There's no escaping it.
Well, what was the criteria in how the team was thinking about selecting those 4 titles?
I mean, Indiana Jones, what did Phil say?
I think when they come out, it'll make sense.
Can we say if either of those titles are Starfield or Indiana Jones?
They are not Starfield or Indiana Jones.
This cuts to the heart of the issue of our times in video games. Exclusives have ruled the day from the earliest console until now. But has it changed? Is it now time to bring down the walled gardens? Xbox's strategy of play anywhere is fundamentally a good one, but it has issues. The infrastructure is not where it needs to be, and I don't want to get into that today, but I believe in the strategy wholeheartedly. But it's a strategy that still requires content that no one else has. Until now, I've given you the historical evidence, the qualitative evidence that exclusivity is still important. But what about the empirical, quantitative evidence, the actual statistics? Let me run through that for you now. In 2021, a study by the Deloitte found that 62% of consumers are willing to pay for what the consumer considers premium content, including exclusive content. According to a report by HubSpot, businesses that prioritize customer experience, including exclusive content, see a 1.6 times higher customer retention rate within their services. Reports from Patreon show that creators offering exclusive content see a 30% increase in engagement from their Patreons. A survey by Accenture found that 57% of consumers are more loyal to brands that offer unique experiences. I mean, have you guys ever met a PlayStation fan? According to a report by PwC, 74% of consumers say that exclusive content that stands out is a key factor in their decision to engage with a brand. A study by Nielsen found that 60% of consumers are more likely to engage with brands that offer unique content. That's just stats from general consumer spending and behavior from a range of product and content-based businesses. Often, though, Game Pass has been dubbed the Netflix of gaming, so let's look at streaming services which are solely content-driven. Netflix has over 3,700 originals within its US-based streaming service. From 2007 to 2013, Netflix grew 40 million in subscribers. In 2013, Netflix began creating exclusive content for the service. Netflix has grown to over 250 million subscribers, generating 31.6 billion in revenue in 2023. Disney Plus reached 146 million subscribers at the end of 2023 and generated 7.4 billion in revenue. Does anyone go to Disney for anything but exclusive content? If you could get those Disney exclusives on Netflix, would you be paying for both? Look, Amazon Prime's exclusives with shows like The Boys grew Prime by 50 million subscribers between 2019 and 2020. I could go on, but of course, I'm sure some of you will point out the difference between TV and gaming, as Don Matrick did back in 2013. Sorry guys, couldn't help that one. I've already covered a lot of the gaming industry's historical facts, but let's do a little bit of the statistics. Sony's PlayStation has sold over 100 million units off the back of last generation's exclusives and remastering The Last of Us 87 times. Sorry, I couldn't help that one either. In 1985, prior to the launch of Super Mario Bros., the NES had only sold about 2.5 million units. After the launch, that number had more than tripled, and by 1991, the NES had sold 61 million units, with Super Mario Bros. Selling 40 million units to become the highest selling game of all time at that time. By the end of 2006, Xbox 360 had sold 10 million units. Only 1 year later, by the end of 2007, and after the launch of Gears of War, that number had nearly doubled to just under 18 million. The game itself sold 10 million copies in 3 weeks. And again, look at the Dreamcast. It struggled to produce first-party content, while the OG PlayStation and Nintendo 64 were practically churning out exclusive content. The Dreamcast failed off the back of a lack of games. Exclusive content has been a driving force in the growth of the gaming industry. From the early arcade hits to modern console blockbusters, exclusives have helped define platforms, drive sales, and build loyal communities. The success of PlayStation, Nintendo, and Xbox contrasted the failures of the Dreamcast underscores that critical role of exclusive content in the gaming ecosystem. The stats and the lessons of the past all point to exclusive content over and above any other factor being one of the most reliable predictors of platform success. It's not all doom and gloom, however. Xbox can still turn this ship around. The Play Anywhere strategy has never been tried on this scale. If Xbox releases its next console with that ethos in mind and does have access to Steam, Epic, itch, and other PC storefronts, and then delivers on power, the competition will again heat up. But make no mistake, we are in uncharted waters. This has not been tried before. This is a massive gamble. Xbox tends to jump both feet in instead of the gradual walk that they should be making towards this strategy. However, don't forget one thing. Mario Bros. Wasn't always an exclusive title. Back when Nintendo was on the rise, they licensed the Mario Bros. Game to the Atari 2600. It gained notoriety and would eventually become a Nintendo exclusive. Xbox needs to hold on to exclusives that gave it its identity, and they need to be transparent about that with us, the fans. But building a fan base of some of the bigger titles and then bringing those back into the Xbox fold would be a 4D chess strategy that would be a little ruthless, but it's one I'd certainly love to see them pull off. I have faith in Xbox's strategy. The roadmap is the strongest it's ever been, both in expected cadence and expected quality. However, all of the evidence that I've shown you here today is against throwing exclusives to the wind. And Xbox needs to understand that and move with caution in the next few years, and we may just see a 360-like resurgence. There's much more that I'd love to talk about here, and I will continue making content along this lines. Guys, thank you for watching this video. If you like this content, please hit the like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. If you like honest conversations from differing perspectives, then consider checking out the Infinite Podcast. It goes live 7 p.m. Fridays Eastern Standard Time. And I'll see you guys in the next one.